This is video number 2 as part of the series that is focused on open response number 2 of the NES Foundations of Reading test. In this video, we're going to focus on key terminology that you'll need to know and be able to use in your written response. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me, Dr. Beth Buchholz. My email is there on the screen. We're going to just do a really quick review of key terminology. If you want more review, there are additional videos available on our site, and so make sure to go and you'll be able to find even more videos to help you dig into these concepts. The reason why terminology is so important is when we look back at this rubric, which is how your written response is going to be scored, subject matter knowledge is a key part of your score, and this is the accuracy and appropriateness and the application of subject matter. And really this comes down to, do you know the appropriate language, and can you use a language, that vocabulary in your written response? And so they want to see evidence that you know the appropriate vocabulary to talk about children's comprehension, and you want to make sure that you are using that key terminology. And so we'll review that here. Again, for open response number 2, it's really an assessment of your understanding of language comprehension, more specifically reading comprehension, and the areas that they're looking for you to be able to comment and write about in relation to a child's oral response after reading a text are: what can you say about their vocabulary knowledge, their knowledge of academic language structures, their literal, inferential, and evaluative comprehension skills, how are the children using comprehension strategies, and then are children able to use their text analysis skills, whether that's a literary text or an informational text. And that includes things like, can the child determine key ideas? Can they analyze craft and structure? Are they able to integrate knowledge? So we'll start here. This is one of the first questions that you want to ask yourself when you look at a child's response. You want to think about, where is there evidence of these different comprehension kind of application of these skills? So literal means that the child can really just directly state what is in the text. So they can locate information, they can restate it, they can paraphrase it, they can summarize it, but they don't really go beyond that. So everything the child says they can point to in the text, but they're not going beyond that. So the literal is just what's really right there in the text. The child who engages in inferential kinds of thinking means that the child can go beyond what's literally in the text. And so they can make inferences. They can go beyond what's stated directly, and they can think about what's indirectly meant by a text. And so they actually have to draw their own conclusions, their own inferences by looking at the text, finding a clue in the text, combining that with their background knowledge, and then making a strong inference. And then evaluative thinking goes even further, and this is when the child is able to use their life experience and their opinion. They're able to kind of critically analyze the text, think about how the text was written, why the text was written, and think about their own opinion in relation to the text. So not just what the text says, but actually what they think about the text. This is another way to think about literal, inferential, and evaluative. And so this question-answer relationships, QAR. And so the kinds of questions that teachers ask will often lead to different kinds of thinking. And so when a teacher asks right there questions, that's getting into the literal thinking, or think and search, which means the child has to kind of go back into the text, but they can find it. Maybe the text uses a little bit different words, but they can really locate where the answer is in the text. A lot of end of grade tests are kind of these kinds of questions. But then we move into author and me questions, and those are questions where the child has to kind of combine their world knowledge with what's in the text and make an inference. And then on my own questions are both inferential and evaluative, And these come from kind of the students' just world knowledge. They don't have to use as much of the text. They're responding to the text and kind of moving beyond the text. Okay. You want to know comprehension strategies. These are the evidence-based comprehension strategies and the language that you want to be using when you write about a child's comprehension. And so you want to look for evidence. Is the child using and activating prior knowledge? Are they making predictions? Are they using their schema? You can also look at, is the child asking questions? So not just is the teacher asking questions, but a good comprehension strategy is that readers ask themselves questions, and then they generate and answer their own questions as they read. Another strategy is to visualize. So when you read something, you might pause for a second and really try to see the picture, but also a movie playing in your head. This is a big one to look for. Do you see evidence of the child actually monitoring their own comprehension? So the child might say something like, I really don't understand this part. And then they might have to go back and reread. They might have to clarify their thinking, and then they fix up their comprehension. So we want children who can be metacognitive and recognize, wow, I don't understand. I need to stop. I need to try a different strategy. I need to fix up my meaning. We're also looking for children who can draw inferences, and then of course children who can summarize and retell a text. Okay. Here is more information on the main comprehension strategy. So it would be worth it to pause the video, to just kind of read through here if you feel like you need that review. It gives you the strategy, it tells you what you would look for as a teacher, and it also offers you activities that you might do to support a child in developing that strategy. And we know for this open response, we have to not only determine what a weakness or what a need is for a child, but we also need to think about what we're going to do. How are we going to respond as a teacher? And so pausing the video here to read through these activities will help you kind of have your own toolkit of what activities you might use depending on what you see the child needs. Okay. You also want to review terminology related to literary response skills. And so this includes things like retelling and summarizing. Can children determine what the plot is? Can they figure out key ideas and details? And then also literary analysis. And this is where children can figure out characters' feelings and motivations. They can determine character traits, character change, cause and effect, problem resolution. What's the lesson or the moral or the theme of this story? And to understand the difference between theme and plot. Okay? And with each one of these, we're helping support children in how to use evidence from the text to support their analysis. You also want to review terminology connected to craft and text structure. And so when children are able to analyze text structure, we know that narrative text structure is really that story grammar, right? The characters, the setting, the problem, the solution. But when we have informational or expository text, it's a different type of text structure. And there's actually more options for text structures. So you might notice that a child is really struggling with the text structure, and that could be a potential next step for you as a teacher, is to explicitly teach those text structures. And then analyzing craft is looking at how the author wrote the text. And so thinking of who is telling the story, what's the point of view, and then what strategies and techniques does the writer use to tell the story. And then vocabulary. You want to be looking at the child's use of understanding of vocabulary and their use of vocabulary as they talk about the text. And so you want to know the difference between tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 words. The term academic language is one that you want to be able to use, which is really connected to those tier 2 words, right? And tier 3 are those content area specific words. You want to know morphology and morphemic analysis. And you also want to be able to talk about figurative language. So similes, metaphors, idioms, allusions, to look at, is the child struggling with figurative language? What would be examples of how you would know a child is struggling with figurative language? And then finally, when you think about next steps, there's some terminology that you'll want to make sure that you know, you review, and you use. And so we teach comprehension strategies or reading skills using the gradual release of responsibility, which is I do, where the teacher models, we do it, which is that guided practice, and then finally the child does it. Another activity or strategy you might use to teach something is reciprocal teaching. That has a strong evidence-based, and that's where there are 4 roles that a small group of children might take. One is going to make predictions, one's going to question, one's going to clarify, and one's going to summarize. And that really invites children to be able to use and apply comprehension strategies in a small group setting. You want to know how you would think about explicitly teaching vocabulary, tier 2 and tier 3 words. And then this term here, explicit instruction, direct instruction, and guided practice. You will absolutely use those terms in whatever your response is. You're going to talk about your direct or explicit instruction and then how you're going to offer guided practice before eventually that child tries it on their own. And this is just a summary of the gradual release. And this can be used to teach anything. You can teach vocabulary, you could teach figurative language, you could teach comprehension strategies. And this is through the teacher taking the bulk of the responsibility to start with, and then gradually offering children more and more opportunities to try it with less and less support until eventually children are trying it mostly on their own. So this video was made possible by the generosity of the Mebane Charitable Foundation. In the following video, we'll actually work through one of these prompts together, and we'll talk about how to apply this vocabulary to the prompt in question.